how to deal with negative thoughts that arise during your meditation. If you don't get this one right, your meditation practice may not bring any results. We'll answer this question in the first 10 minutes of the podcast. Hi everyone, my name is Abhinava and I'm the co-host of Spirit Matters, a bi-weekly no-nonsense podcast for modern seekers based on the teachings of Sri Chinmoy. In this episode, we focus on the role of conscience in our spiritual journey. At the end of this episode, you'll know how to use the whispers of your conscience to help you navigate the complexities of life, why it is so hard to deal with your conscience and how to change your mindset around it, and how to grow and develop with your conscience so that instead of a judging enemy, it becomes a loving friend. If you're a regular listener to our podcast, you probably noticed that we changed our name. Don't worry, we plan to stick with this one from now on. Please consider subscribing and let us know in the comments if there's any problem or topic that you'd like us to discuss in our future episodes. Keep meditating and stay surrendered. Today's topic is conscience, but before we dive into the topic of the day, we want to discuss a seeker problem. And Fajan, you are introducing today's seeker problem.
Yes, I have the honor of bringing the seeker's problem to light today. The question that we have is, how do I deal with negative thoughts that come up during my meditation?
So yeah, I recognize this problem from the beginning days of my spiritual journey. And when I started to meditate, like I do remember the feeling of being overwhelmed sometimes with negative thoughts. And the problem that I had was that I thought that these thoughts were really powerful. And so that is very often the feeling that they give you. They make you feel that they are actually very powerful and that they're stronger than you. And that's like one of the first things to know and is to have faith that your own soul, your own inner power is infinitely stronger than these negative thoughts. So it's very important to feel that there is a power in you that is really infinitely stronger than these negative thoughts. And that's something that I really had to learn. And the best way to learn that is from experience and by meditating and experiencing your inner strength. But it's really good to know, to kind of have faith in the fact that there is inside you this boundless power that is much stronger than all that negativity. And not to be fooled by the illusion that the negative thoughts give you, that they are very strong. And since you're meditating, like a risk of these negative thoughts is that they swell up because of the force of your meditation. Because when you meditate, you focus your awareness, and anything that comes into your awareness during meditation, it's like it's being amplified by the focus that is in your consciousness at that time. It's like having a lens, and a word that comes under the lens all of a sudden blows up and becomes really big. And so if you're meditating, you're really focusing, and all of a sudden a negative thought comes and you allow it to, you put your focus on it, then that force gets the strength of your focus and actually becomes stronger. So there's a few ways I feel to deal with thoughts when that happens. The most effective one for me was to feel that these thoughts are actually harmless. They're like insects. They're like little ants that are crawling around in your mind, but they can't really do anything. They're actually harmless. And so if you really make yourself feel that these are like ants or like little insects that are crawling around in your mind, but they cannot leave any trace, they cannot do any harm, then immediately you have, taken care of the bulk of the problem. They will not be able to overpower you in that way. And you can easily then ignore them and move on. And of course, that's the next step is to not cling to those thoughts, but to just let them go. Thoughts actually have their own pride. When you ignore them, they feel that, it's useless to bother you, and they'll actually go away after some time. They're like flies. They're buzzing around, but if you just ignore them, they will at some point go away. And there's another practical method, which is to feel that these thoughts are like fish, and that on the top of your head, you actually have a little plug there. You can release that plug and then feel that those negative thoughts, like fish, they're being flushed out of you. It's like you're visualizing these negative thoughts going out the top of your head, where your crown chakra is, up high into the cosmos. And that's a visualization that you feel you're releasing these negative thoughts. They're no longer inside you. For me personally, I like the ant method better, to really feel that these thoughts are harmless. And then they don't bother you anymore. And if you're a beginner in meditation, it's really good not to focus on them. And if you feel that it's somehow impossible, like if the methods don't work for you and you feel these thoughts keep bugging you, it's actually best at that time to stop the meditation. Because if you do all the time focus on them, they become stronger. And so if you feel, okay, today I'm not capable of doing, I'm not capable of feeling that they're harmless, I can't really get rid of them, they're very strong. At that time, it's actually better to just stop your meditation for that moment and try again later. And as you progress in your meditation, your own inner power becomes stronger, becomes more to the fore. And then it's much easier to deal with the negative thoughts, actually to transform them even. Um, because ultimately that's what happens in meditation, is that we transform these thoughts. So first it can be a negative thought. It can come in the form of doubt. I'm not good enough, or I will never be able to attain inner peace. I will never be able to make spiritual progress. And after some time, you can get a counter thought that is exactly the opposite of what that thought is trying to tell you. So instead of saying, I'm not good enough, say, I am a divine child. I'm a child of God. I am inundated with peace and light. And if you feed those thoughts, then you make that reality stronger in you. And automatically, by making the positive reality stronger, you're making the negative reality weaker. So ultimately, I think it's important to keep focusing on the positive, to bring that into your consciousness. But it's said that in the very beginning, it's good to have no thoughts. So just don't allow any thought at all to arise in the mind, whether good or bad. Because the problem is that when you allow a good thought to come in, very often behind that good thought there can be a negative thought hiding. It's a thief that's hiding behind a good person, and the good person is entering into the house, and before you know it, the thief sneaks in with the good person. And so these negative thoughts very often do that. They hide behind positive thoughts, and before you know it, they can sneak into your mind. So I'd say, like in the beginning, really lock the doors of your mind. Don't allow any thought to enter. And then after some time, when you become stronger in your meditation, you can allow these thoughts to come up. And if they're positive thoughts, you can allow them to grow. And if they're negative thoughts, you can just put the light of your own soul, your own being against them, and they'll just poof, they'll just evaporate. If you really feel strongly identify with the soul, a negative thought doesn't have any hold on you. It cannot grasp anything to hold on to. So it just has to disappear. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Do you have anything to add to that?
Wow, that was very thorough, and I did like the fact that you had two animal-related techniques to deal with the problems of thoughts: the ant method or the fish method. So
Exactly.
people can choose whichever pleases them. I would say that I have come across the same types of situations. We had one interesting situation in one of our meditation classes we were giving here, where every time after the meditation where we would ask for some feedback or ask for some questions, one lady would tell us that she was having all of these horrific images, all these horrific thoughts were appearing in her mind. And so we were wondering what was the cause of this. And so over the series of the course, she continued each time she would sit down to meditate, all of these really horrible images would appear in her own mind. And in some ways, meditation is one of the strong tools you have to actually let go of uncomely or ugly things or ideas, thoughts, images, information that you've taken into your being and that you're trying to expel it from yourself. Those ideas can appear inside your meditation as an opportunity for you to let go of them and throw them out. And so when we asked the lady what she would do in her spare time, it turned out she was a huge fan of horror movies. So she would spend all her time watching horror movies and getting terrified. So she had this absolute bounty of horrific images that had built up within her. And sitting down to meditate was the only opportunity that her being had found to try and expel all of these wrong thoughts and wrong ideas and wrong images. And so it was a really hard process. And so people don't really take it seriously, I don't think. the consequences of what we watch, what we see, what we hear, what we take into our being. And so very often those thoughts or the ugliness that we see, or the negative thoughts, they can come from information or ideas that we've taken into our being, and it's our deeper part of our being is trying to do some sort of clearance of those things, and letting
Yeah.
go of them. And so
Yeah.
I think that's also a positive way to look at it. So instead of thinking and identifying yourself only with the negative thoughts and thinking that, I must be some sort of a bad person to be having these types of thoughts, you can also see that the world around us puts all of this onto us at times. And so the meditation can be a place where you can actually let go of these things. And the great spiritual masters have actually talked about this as well. And so Sri Chinmoy had a great technique where he said, if you have wrong thoughts or wrong ideas, or things that you're trying to get rid of, just throw them into me. And then he was able to let go of them and dispose of them. And it could be any of the great spiritual teachers. It may be that you have a feeling towards the Buddha or the Christ or Krishna. But any of the great teachers, I think if you're having problems with these negative thoughts and emotions, one thing is just to try and imagine that you're throwing them out of yourself and giving them to one of the great teachers, because these teachers have the capacity to remove these things and to transform them. But Sri
Yeah.
Chinmoy did warn about this. He did warn that very often we think we want to get rid of these things. So we've got some particular types of negative thoughts that we commonly have. And at some point we think, okay, I'm sick to death of these thoughts. I want to get rid of them. So we throw them into our teacher or into the one of the great teachers. But he said the funny thing is that very often, some short while after we've thrown them out, we try and get them back. We think, oh no, I've lost something most precious, and then we start rummaging around in the trash heap looking for these types of things. So we have to be really sincere that when we do try and get rid of these thoughts, that we don't immediately try and find them again and try and bring them back. And everyone has had that experience where you have some particular sort of thought that perhaps give you some sort of malicious pleasure, or you have some attachment to that thought. And then you think, right, I never want to have these types of thoughts again. So you try and get rid of them. But then, funnily enough, 2, 3 hours later, you find yourself reminiscing and rummaging around, looking for those thoughts again. So I think that's where you have to be really wise and realize that these thoughts do not have, like you said, that they're actually incredibly weak and powerless, and there is no real abiding satisfaction or joy to be found in and indulging in these types of thoughts. And when you can let them go and not bring them back in, all the better.
Lovely. Okay, so let us move on to our second section, the aphorism of the week.
Yes.
Today's aphorism, we selected an aphorism of Sri Chinmoy. I'm going to read it out and then we're going to talk about it. So here we go. Not because God is indifferent to us, but because he is dreaming a very special dream in and through us, we frequently meet with calamities and misfortunes. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think it actually captures something really profound and powerful about the spiritual life and about how we actually look at the experiences that we're having. Because very often we think if we're doing good things and we're trying to aspire and we're trying to do a spiritual practice, then we somehow should have some sort of idyllic life with no problems and no worries, and nothing bad should ever happen to us. Which I think is the wrong approach to reality, because as we've talked about in the past, that there's always trouble brewing in the path in front of us. And so if we can, instead of looking at that as a negative, instead of saying, why are these calamities and this misfortunes happening to me? Instead, we could actually see that I've been chosen to deal with these problems. I've been chosen to actually face these things head on, because within all of the trials and tribulations of your life is the greatest potential for growth. And so instead of seeing these things as some sort of a curse and seeing them as something that is going to take away from the quality of our life, we can instead look at them and see, oh, the universe has trusted me to deal with these problems. It's seen that I have the capacity. And so it takes what our mind can often take to be a negative event, and we can actually see the potential growth and the potential goodness that can come through going through these experiences.
Yeah, and in old mythological stories, the treasure was often guarded by dragons. And so, if you have something valuable to strive towards, there is going to be dragons there that are going to guard that. And these are the obstacles and the calamities and the misfortunes that come from chasing something that is very precious and very valuable. So, in the spiritual life, we want to learn our own inner treasure, our soul, and the peace, light, and bliss that come from discovering our true self. But at the same time, when we go deep within, we also at the same time have to face our lower realities. So our doubts, our fears, our anxieties, our worries, the negativity that we just talked about, that's also there. And, it's not that we can just bypass that and just go straight to the treasure. It's actually impossible. So we have to go through the darkness and face all these problems before we really reach the light. I think Sri Aurobindo said, no soul can reach heaven that has not passed through hell.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really profound statement. And I like you pointing out no spiritual bypassing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the kind of the code word today. There's no spiritual bypass. You have to go through all the hardships and the ignorance that is inside us as well.
And I mean, it makes sense as well that the treasures, because in some ways the treasure is information that we haven't had access to in the past. That's what a real treasure is, because you learn something. You actually become a better version of yourself by facing up to things you don't want to look at. And so that really makes sense that to find the information that you don't have, you have to look in places that you haven't wanted to look in the past. And so there's a famous story from King Arthur, and the knights were all looking for the. I think it was when they were looking for the Holy Grail. And so the instruction was, or the idea was, to go into the forest, to go out to the forest and enter into the forest in the place that looks darkest to each individual knight. So they all wandered off into the forest, into the place that looked darkest to them. And
Yeah,
I think that's great, because the thing is, what is terrifying and dark and a place you don't want to go for you or for me is going to be two different places.
yeah,
Because, for example, like a lot of people imagine that the dragon that is going to eat them and destroy them is waiting up on stage when they do a performance. And so they
yeah,
feel it. If they find themselves up on the stage, that this dragon is going to appear and is just absolutely going to devour them. And so they never want to go on the stage in front of people because they're fearful, so fearful of facing up to this dragon. But as you know, as someone who's been up there and dealt with the dragon, of being in front of a group of people and performing and doing all of these things, that so much growth happens when you get up there and you face up to that dragon.
yeah.
And so, but yeah, each person needs to find in their own life, in their own ways, the places that they're most fearful about treading, and then perhaps judiciously start to explore that area.
Yeah. I have to think about our dear friend Carlos from Brazil. He's a fan of the podcast, so he's definitely listening to this one. And he's going through some very, very tough, challenging times at the moment. And I read this poem to him actually when we just went skiing together for a few days with a mutual friend. And I read this poem to him and it really moved him because he really is going through a lot of calamities and misfortunes at the moment. He acquired a company and it's just a lot of headaches that he has to deal with. His roof is now blowing off his warehouse, and there's all kinds of problems on a daily basis. He has 44 employees, and so yeah, for him it was really it's almost like a consolation to feel that all these calamities they may just mean that he is onto something really beautiful at the end of this, and he will definitely grow through having all these hardships and negative experiences. I mean, they're super intense and they're just fired at him one after the other. And, I was thinking if I was in his shoes, I don't know if I could hold up the way he does. So I do admire him for that.
Yes, I also admire Carlos. So Carlos, keep strong, keep striving forward.
Exactly. Awesome. All right. So that brings us to the topic of the week, which is conscience. And it's an interesting topic, and we can look at it from different perspectives. We'll definitely look at it from the spiritual perspective. But I'd like to start with a quote by Shakespeare. I feel within me a peace above all earthly anxieties, a still and quiet conscience.
Beautiful.
So to have a still and quiet conscience is like, that is the treasure. And I think it's synonymous with following, being aligned with your soul. because I think conscience and the inner voice are synonymous, right? It's conscience is an inner voice that comes to us and it tells us when we do something wrong, but it also inspires us to do the right thing. So I think it has these two phases. It definitely warns us if we're going to do the wrong thing, and if we do wrong things, it chastises us, or it scolds us, and it can have this kind of judgmental feeling, something that judges us, but also it will inspire us to do the right thing. And conscious is also something that can be calibrated. So it's like a sword. It can be sharpened. And I came across some of Sri Chinmoy's writings where he speaks about conscious as a sword that we have to sharpen. So I'm also interested to know your thoughts about it.
Yeah, so I mean, conscience is a part of all of our human experiences, and all of us have experienced it numerous, uncountable times, I'm sure, throughout our lives. And it's quite interesting, actually. Sri Chinmoy was asked, when does the conscience actually appear in our being? Like, is it there from birth? And he said, actually, it starts to develop around the age of 3. And I was thinking that's quite interesting because we often talk about small children. We talk about the terrible twos and
Oh yeah.
about how difficult children are at that point. And it's like, oh, well, that makes perfect sense then. They don't have a conscience, so they can act as abysmally as they please without any ramifications.
They're unconscionable persons. Unconscionable.
So everyone is aware of this experience, and I think what happens generally over people's lives is this type of information that comes to them from the conscience starts to get on people's nerves. So over time, people, instead of embracing it as a way to develop their wisdom and develop their insight into how to live the best possible life, tend to try and find techniques or ways to quieten this voice. And I think it is possible through your actions and your choices to actually almost completely silence the conscience,
Oh
to
yeah.
make it to the point where you no longer even can hear or see or feel the guidance that it's trying to give you.
Well, I
And
think
if
then you have the psychopath. The psychopath is somebody who's completely silenced his conscience, right? And it doesn't bother him anymore.
Yeah, and so you want to think, like, what is the aim of the conscience? And so people in the past have always considered that it is the voice of nature, it is the voice of God, it is the voice that is trying to guide us in the best possible way through our lives. And so if you take conscience to be that thing, the idea that you would want to silence it, so it's like you have a compass that can help guide you through the world. And instead of paying attention, think, okay, that's a very useful thing to have and to deal with the complexity of the world. Instead of using it, I'm going to smash it, or I'm going to hide it, or I'm going to bury it deep underground so I never need to pay attention to it. That seems to really probably be the wrong approach to the conscience. And I've got a couple of aphorisms here, and I had one actually that talked about that. Um, so this is from Sri Chinmoy. He said, "Unless my heart takes care of my conscience, how can my conscience take care of my complicated life?"
I saw
And
that. Yeah.
so I think that's the right type of thinking, that the conscience is the part of our being that can actually help us deal with the complications of life. And
How? How do you think it does that?
yeah, so this is the great thing. So I think we've talked previously about intuition, and so I think intuition and conscience have some form of a relationship. And so I think
Yes.
conscience for me tends to be more on the protective side. So it tends to skew more towards reminding us when we're going off the tracks. So it's letting us know when we're walking in dangerous territory and that we're doing things
Yes.
that we shouldn't be doing. And intuition helps guide us when we are on the right path, but it helps show us the road ahead of us. So
Can I
that's
can I read to you an aphorism by Sri Chinmoy that I came across? I'm sure you've
great.
seen it because it's exactly conscience and intuition are the inner experiences of the soul that try to protect and perfect our outer life.
Yeah, so that's
So that's
perfect.
exactly what you were talking about. It's really, yeah. I was
Yes.
thinking the same lines. Yeah.
So yes, for me, the conscience is trying to protect us from making mistakes and doing the wrong things, like repeatedly, because when you make a mistake once, it's like that's understandable because the world is so complicated, and you will misspeak, you will misstep at times, you will misunderstand situations, and the conscience will help remind us not to do that again. It'll help guide us back onto the right path. And the intuition is trying to perfect the way in front of us. It's trying to see the beautiful opportunities and trying to see the terrain that lies ahead of us so we can navigate through that more carefully. And it's quite interesting because people, traditionally Christians, have often seen conscience as the voice of God. Because if you want to believe that God exists and has any sense of concern for you, you want to think, okay, well, if God exists, how would God communicate with me? And so ancient traditions have used different ideas. So there's been the idea of omens. So you look out into the world around you and you try and understand God's will through the omens and the signs. Maybe there's a particular spring came early this year, so that means something, or it's a really bad winter, so that means something else, or you see a particular um, flock of geese
Sure.
flying past on a particular day, and that means something else. So we've looked at omens and signs in the world, but if you really believe that your consciousness is somehow fundamentally connected to the same universal consciousness that has brought about this whole universe, you would think that there would be a more direct way of receiving information than having to, you know, perhaps, look in the leaves at the bottom of your cup of tea, or sacrifice a goat and look in his gizzards to see, what signs can be seen. It seems like I'm sure there could be an easier way to get guidance from the divine.
I always
The,
get great results from the goat gizzard, I have to say.
yes. Yeah, exactly. And I thought you would be the one. It's like I think in a place like Australia, we just had a team of the peace run that was running around Australia, and I'm sure they saw so much roadkill, so many
Oh, yes.
animals by
Dead
the
kangaroos.
so yeah, I was thinking that there must be a way that you can do some intuition and get some omens from the particular animals that they see splattered around the Australian highway. So that was perhaps guiding them through
Yes.
that ordeal of running around Australia. But if we get back to it, there should be it seems wise to think that there might be a better way of receiving intuition and knowledge and insight from the divine. And so the idea that what the conscience is that voice of infinite consciousness speaking to us. But the thing is, we have to always remember that the way it speaks to us is not going to be the way that we speak to ourselves. And so that's what you'll notice, that the voice of your conscience is different from the voice you're constantly listening to inside your own head. So that conversation that is constantly ongoing within you, that's not the same thing as the conscience. And so we like that is the voice of the mind, let's say, or the persona or the ego. And so that's constantly giving us a commentary about our own actions, about the actions of everyone around us, about everything it's seeing and experiencing. It's an ongoing narrative that we're playing. But we all know that that is not the right form of knowledge to guide us through the world. Because if we listen only to that voice and that conversation that's going on in our own head, first of all, it's a conversation we're having between ourselves, within ourselves. So it's just a very strange thing when you think about it, because the way our thoughts tends to we experience them as though we're having conversation. And the thing is, well, who are we having the conversation with? Because if I'm thinking the thought, like obviously I should already know what the thought is going to be, since I am the one having the thought. But there's I think that's also a big problem that we have, is that we misidentify who we actually are. So when we think of who we are, we think of that conversation that's constantly running in our head. But I think that's just us. The thinking of the mind is like the beating of the heart. It's like the breathing of the lungs. It's like the digesting of the food. It's just something that constantly is happening. And we're not really in control of it in the way that we think we are. So, any
Yeah.
any any thoughts on
I,
this?
no, exactly. I like that. And so conscious speaks in a different voice. And so, like, if I think of my own life when conscience comes to the fore, so when I do something wrong and I feel that in leading a spiritual life, I think you're really well calibrated towards your conscience, because that is the goal of the spiritual life, is to listen to your inner voice. I would say, if I have to if I have to attach a goal to the spiritual life, like what are we striving towards? What is our aim? Then I would say it is listening to the dictates of our soul, listening to our inner voice and obeying that voice. And so that is another word for listening to your conscience. But then, when does your conscience speak and how does it speak? Exactly like you were mentioning. And I think the moment you do something wrong, it's a pang. You feel some pang inside you. Something in you is telling you, ooh, that is not, that you didn't act in the proper way here. And so I remember just from a couple of years ago when I was on the train and I had the opportunity to kind of not buy a train ticket, just go into the train and I did that. I took advantage of the opportunity and I traveled like without paying for it. And I thought like, oh, that's, it's not a problem. I've been on the train hundreds of times. I always buy a ticket. I can go this one time. It's not a big deal. But the funny thing was, I all the time when I did that, I felt uneasy and uncomfortable. And that whole train journey, my conscience was just pricking and pricking at me and just saying, "Hey, you should buy a ticket. You should have bought a ticket. Should have bought a ticket." And it was a very unpleasant experience, even though I thought, "Oh, I'm doing myself a favor. I'm saving money. I'm traveling for free." It was not at all enjoyable, and I much rather just paid for the experience just to have that peaceful and quiet conscience, like Shakespeare was talking about, and I have because that's ultimately, I think, that's the real treasure is that inner peace. Because you will not have any inner peace the moment you're not obeying your conscience. And your conscience will make sure that, it's not going to give you peace if you're not abiding by your inner voice, by its dictates. So it's a very tricky situation sometimes.
And I think in some ways that's why modern people don't like the idea of the conscience, because it is that part of you that is going to go against the idea that we're just simply here to get as much as we can and to have as many good experiences as we can. And it's all about my um, pleasure and my satisfaction, and the rest of the world can be damned. Because as soon as we start living that type of life, it might be that you have through hook or by crook, you have made this fantastic wealth for yourself. And so now you're able to do as you please, and you can go and spend your winter months in the Maldives, sitting on a beautiful beach and enjoying the resort lifestyle. But the terrible thing for people who have done that is they find that they've fulfilled all of their material desires. They have everything they could possibly want, and yet still they're unhappy. Still there's that pang of guilt, and there's that sense that they should be doing something more with their lives than just hedonistically enjoying the pleasures of the world. And so I think that's why many people do want to take that compass of the conscience and bury it far, far underground, because it
Yeah.
simplifies your life. Then you can make some simplistic idea of what a good life would look like, and then you go about it, and then you perhaps achieve it, and then you can finally enjoy life. But the conscience, when we allow it to speak to us, it has a much more interesting and adventurous path for us through the world. And so I think that's something that people have to come to terms with. And it's very interesting because we often think that if we had someone else's life, we would be much happier. We see someone who doesn't seem to suffer from the problems we have, they don't seem to have the same issues that we're dealing with, and we think, oh my God, if I could only be them, my life would be great. Like, look at them, their life looks so easy. But it takes me back to this idea that we've talked about before, where if you took all of the problems of the world and you put them in a pool, like a giant swimming pool, and then you let everyone in the world come to that pool and you had to choose a set of problems to deal with, you would most probably end up choosing the actual problems that you have right now, because these are the problems that are you're most well attuned and most qualified, you're best qualified to deal with the particular problems that you have. And that's why when we look around the world and we see people, we see them dealing with their problems and we think, oh my God, it's so simple and obvious, how to deal with this guy's problem. It's like, I can't believe he can't see it.
So can you give an example of that? Like what kind of problem would that be?
So, I mean, what's a common problem? I mean, a lot of people, the problem they have is they feel that they're too busy, and that they would love to have more time, that they would like to have all this time so they could do the things that they really enjoy, and they could really partake in their hobbies and really, live the life that they're meant to live, they feel. And you see the problem for them is that often they've got a lot of responsibilities. And especially the grass is always greener. So when you're someone with a lot of responsibilities, you want to have no responsibilities. And actually, for people who have no responsibilities, they don't realize it. But actually, on some deeper level, they actually want to have some responsibilities. And
Yeah.
so you're always going to be unhappy with what you have. And it's only when you experience the alternative you actually start to realize, oh, actually, my life when I was really dynamic and busy and was full, and I had children, I had businesses, and I had all of these things, you actually look back on those things and see how wondrous and enjoyable those times were. And so your so-called problem, it's like you take a CEO of a company or someone who is really busy and dynamic, and then they're probably really looking forward to their retirement. But very often when they get to their retirement, they actually don't enjoy their retirement at all compared to the busyness of their lives, because there was a dynamism and there was an intensity that you don't find when you are in the Maldives, sipping cocktails and relaxing
Yeah.
on the beach.
Yeah, that's the secret of surrender. Like we talk about surrender as being one of the highest spiritual qualities. And if you have true surrender, I think you are flooded with responsibilities, but you're dancing with them. It's not like they're burdens anymore. You're kind of dancing with them, and life is giving you exactly it's calibrated the responsibilities to such an extent that you are qualified to deal with it. And it gives you joy dealing with it. And we have a song that we sing. Sri Chinmoy wrote a song that we often sing, and it's something that's very counterintuitive. And some seekers they really don't understand the song when they see it for the first time. And the lyrics of the song are, "Give me no freedom, give me no freedom, my Lord Supreme. If you really love me, then give me no freedom, even for a fleeting moment." And so the idea here is that if God gives you no freedom, it means that you're constantly employed by the divine, by your own soul, and you're really dancing the surrender dance. So you're unconditionally surrendered to the flow of life. And so there's no room for your own ego or your own mind to create what you want to have, the experiences that you want to have, but you're completely surrendered to whatever the infinite intelligence of the universe is giving you. And those experiences, that is wisdom, because those experiences that the universe is giving you are always going to be far more interesting, adventurous, and fulfilling than anything that your own mind or your own ego will dream up. And so ultimately, it's actually the ultimate freedom is to have no so-called outer freedom. So to kind of like curb the mind and say, okay, mind, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm just going to surrender, and whatever life throws in my path, that is what I'm going to do. And in a sense, there's no freedom there in the sense that we're used to define that.
Yeah, and that's the thing, that the freedom that we're looking for is not actually the freedom that we want and need. The freedom we're looking for is the freedom of pleasure and sense pleasure and sense enjoyment. But actually, the pleasure and enjoyment of being gainfully employed by the universe to do the things that you should be doing is actually meaningful in a completely different and much more profound and powerful way. So yeah, I do like the fact that you brought up that song, because it is so counterintuitive, and it goes against the grain of what so many people um, are looking for. There's this philosophy going around now called FIRE, which is financial independence, retire early. And so this is a lot of people's big dream. But I think instead, if you could start to find the meaning and purpose in the responsibility of life, that is a much more meaningful experience in the long term. And I wanted to bring up one thing. So I was talking to a friend of mine who recently achieved his master's in philosophy. And I was asking him, what are the modern philosophers? How do they take the idea of conscience, and where do they place it? And how do they discuss it? And he said he actually hadn't really thought about that. And he realized they're completely silent on the topic. Because the problem with the voice of the conscience is it goes against so much of what we're trying to say is the way to live a life. We're like, that we live in a material universe, and some sort of reductionist model. And this voice itself somehow seems to go counter to that, because there'll be some argument that we're just biological creatures and we're just, out for ourselves, and we're trying to accrue as many resources, as much power as we can, so we can, have the best opportunities in our lives. And so, if you believe that to be true, this voice of the conscience, which will come in, and very often, as an example, you may have, by some skullduggery, got an advantage over other people. And so you should think, if we're purely just these biological creatures, that would be a great thing, that we've found a way to get an advantage over other people, perhaps an unearned advantage. But that's how the biological game is working. It's like, might is right, and the strong devour the weak. And so you would think, that is something that you should be pleased about. But in fact, like you had the experience on the train, like, you financially were, ahead, because you didn't have to pay for that particular train ticket. So if you were just purely a biological being, you would think, wow, that's amazing. Now I've got this resources that I can spend on more food or something else. But instead, you spent the whole train journey just pricking yourself and just causing yourself untold misery. So in some ways, to me, it is something that does prove to us that there is something transcendent beyond just purely the game of resources and the material world, that there is a moral element that is fundamental. It's not some sideline that you can dabble in when you want. Because some people will even say that the moral aspect of life is simply another higher level strategy to get power and influence. But
Yeah.
but you see, when you go against it, that you suffer, and sometimes it's really unreasonable. So I have like a wee example of, this was several years ago during the COVID years, and I was out riding my bike, and I'd been for a ride up on the hills, and it was wintertime, and I was coming back through town, and I was on a bike path, and a woman biked past me going the opposite direction. And just as she biked past, I noticed one of her gloves fall out of her back pocket. And I was already heading like towards my house at a high speed. She was going in the opposite direction at a high speed. And so by the time I really became conscious of it, she was already at 50, 100 meters away, and I was 50 or 100 meters away. And I had this feeling that I should turn around and stop and pick up the glove and then bike and catch up to her and give it to her. But I looked at the distances, and she was biking away, and I was trying to get back home. And so I thought, okay, it's unreasonable to expect that I should have to do this. So I biked home, and I just couldn't get the sense out of my being that I'd done the wrong thing, that I should have been in that moment completely unreasonable with myself. And because that's the thing with your conscience, it's perfectly calibrated to you. So, and very often, especially as you've evolved through listening to the conscience actually starts to give you like higher level tasks to do. It starts to ask you to do more and more unreasonable things, because you've already dealt with the kindergarten level. You've already gone through the kindergarten level, and then you've gone through the primary school level, and maybe you're getting up to the high school level. And so now the things that it's going to push you towards or bring up are things that, like, 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't have even noticed. Like, 10 years ago, I would not have thought twice about that. But it was at a point now where my conscience was saying, hey, you can be much more unreasonable. Because when I thought about it, like, the outcome in the world of me turning around, biking back, picking it up, biking like crazy to catch up to this lady and giving her her glove back was so much more valuable than me just biking home and the convenience of just carrying on and doing what I was doing. And so I think that's the thing. It starts to call us to ever and higher levels of greatness within our own life. And like, no one would else looking at that situation would think that that was a moment of greatness. But for me, on some way, it was a moment to do something that I would have really valued and seen as great.
I love that idea of conscience as an evolutionary concept that you can go through kindergarten, high school, university. And I totally recognize what you're saying, because yeah, to be unreasonable, it is very often unreasonable, the things that your conscience asks you to do. And I've had a few examples in my life also of things that were completely unreasonable and nobody would even notice them. They were so subtle. But I have done them, and I remember feeling so proud after that, feeling so satisfied, even though it was a small thing. But just like doing that, going that extra mile, which nobody will notice, for that person, or doing something that nobody will even see that you've done that. But your conscious knows it. Your conscious definitely registers. And as a result, going back to Shakespeare's quote, a quiet and peaceful conscience, that is such an amazing treasure to have in life, and to have that peace. And there's a little bit of Sri Chinmoy uses the term divine pride. It's not a human pride. It's not like your ego swells up, but there's some element in you that just feels so proud of what you did. And it's a very positive way of feeling proud of yourself. A way that really, I feel, strengthens your own soul and strengthens your inner being.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
I
lovely.
I had that experience really strongly last year at the end of summer. For me, where I had this customer come into my store who had a whole selection of beautiful world music instruments that all had belonged to her beloved sister who had died very young. And she had had all of these instruments sitting around in her house, and they always reminded of her sister. And she, at some point, had got this feeling that they needed to live again, these instruments. So there was a cajon, and there was a bowron, and there was a darbuka, and there was a djembe. So there was all these beautiful percussion instruments. And so she came in, and she explained the situation, and she left them with me for me to sell, and they were this beautiful connection for her to her sister. But she'd seen that no one was using them; they were just sitting around gathering dust. And I really strongly got this feeling that I needed to record a clip of me playing on each of the instruments and send it to her. And it was completely irrational. It was completely unnecessary. I'd agreed that, I'll take them and I'll sell them on behalf for her. And so, that was the whole arrangement. But I felt it so strongly that I got my friend to come into my store, and, spent some time just learning, playing on the instruments a little bit. And then I did a recording playing on each of the 5 different instruments that she had left with me, and I sent them to her. It was like, a minute clip of me playing a rhythm on each of these different instruments. And it was something that I felt so good about afterwards. Like, I really felt like I'd done something really truly meaningful. And for her as well, like, she really was profusely grateful that she now, she had this final memory, and saw that the instruments were being loved and appreciated. And so it brought real closure to her. And I could have easily walked away from the store and not bothered to do it, because it was after hours, and I had other things to do. But it's always interesting how these little feelings that push us to do these unreasonable actions, they become things that it becomes so memorable for us. And the fact that
Yeah.
I still remember this glove incident, like 3 or 4 years later, and
Yeah.
because it was like a lost opportunity. And
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that you want to see, that when you have these moments where your conscience has spotted an opportunity for you to do something, wonderful, and then you miss it, that's the thing that the conscience is going to remind you of.
Yeah, it becomes really sad. And I had an experience like that. This was in 2009, so even longer ago. And I still remember that very clearly. And I may have told this story before, but I had a birthday of one of my good friends. It was his birthday that weekend, but I had already made other plans. I was going to an event of our meditation centers in Germany, and I'd already bought train tickets for it. And I told him, I'm really sorry I can't come on your birthday. And he decided to throw a little party with a lot of our mutual friends. And so I was sitting that Friday afternoon in my room, and I had packed my bags, and I was ready to go to the train station. And I remember sitting in my chair, and I just, for some reason, I could not get up. My body felt like it was made out of absolute lead. Like, I did not want, something in me did not want to get up, and it was totally irrational and didn't understand it. And I just felt, no, no, don't go. Just stay here. Just stay. But then my mind, of course, my rational mind came to the fore. It's like, no, 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 I've bought the tickets. I've told people I'm coming. So I dragged myself out of my chair, and I dragged myself to the train station, and everything went well. I didn't have any accidents or anything. I had a good weekend. But then when I came back and I heard the stories of the birthday party, it appeared that it was the birthday party of the century. Like, they had so much fun. They went to an amusement park, and they were like little children again. They had so much fun, and they talked about this for weeks and months later. I mean, and so the moment I heard those stories, then immediately knew, oh, this is why I should have stayed home. My soul really knew that this was going to happen and wanted me to participate. Like it knew I would get so much more joy and meaning and purpose from this birthday party than I would have going to this other event. And so that really taught me, I still think about that incident like it's an actual, it was a physical feeling that I was having, like my body did not want to go up. So there's this wisdom inside of us that already knows the experiences that we are, we should have, the opportunities that are coming our way. And yeah, and it feels very like a missed opportunity. It feels so sad when when you miss that, and it's like it's never going to come back. So yeah, there's a little bit of mourning connected to that, but it also teaches you a real valuable lesson.
Yeah, we've got to hope that there's another birthday party of the century coming up.
I
That's
know
that
it's a new.
we have a golden dream in front of us.
Yeah, it was a bit early in the century to have a birthday party of the century, but there's
Yeah.
always hope. Good.
So I've got a couple of aphorisms here. So this one from Sri Chinmoy: if we want to hear the voice of God, then we must learn the conscience language. And then this is another one: let your conscience be your judge, not your mind. So, and then the one we said earlier was, unless my heart takes care of my conscience, how can my conscience take care of my complicated life? So I think there's some connection, some interesting connection between the heart and conscience. And so if we think of the mind and the way we normally would judge our life and our progress and how things are going, we're going to use the mind as the judge. The mind is going to be the voice that's critiquing, and it's going to be the voice that's giving a narrative and telling you this, that, or the other thing. But I think that's very much the wrong form, or the wrong judge of our progress in life, because it seems that the conscience, which is the deeper knowing and the deeper voice, it seems if we can use our heart as the main tool of life and use the mind as well, like we said, it makes a great emissary and a very poor master, the mind. And so if we can instead, like as we've talked about innumerable times, if we can actually learn to live and exist in the world coming from the heart rather than the mind, that actually opens up the access to the conscience as well, because that becomes the big question: is, okay, if we have this conscience, and the conscience can help guide us and illumine us and take us through different levels of being in the world, like, well, how do we actually go about learning to listen to the conscience? And I think the most powerful way is actually learning, like we've said so many times, to bring our awareness down into our heart and learn to operate and live in the world from the place of the heart, because the heart is the source of all of the deeper divine qualities. So of course that's going to be the part of our being that's going to be more connected with our conscience. And so I think if we want to hear the voice of the conscience, we need to be living in the space of the heart.
Yeah, very true. I also think that everybody experiences conscience, from time to time. And so one good way to start practicing with that is to really pay attention. When you feel that little pang or that little disappointment in you after you've done something, like take that seriously and feel like, oh, my conscience is actually giving me that feeling right now. So what should I have done? And then be sincere enough to really look back at your actions and judge yourself, compassionately but fairly. So in my case, next time buy a train ticket. That's the message that your conscience is giving you, and then obey that message. So that's one way of sharpening the sword of your conscience, because I do feel that if you obey your conscience, it's going to reward you. It's going to reward you by being clearer next time. It's going to reward you by being, it really becomes a friend in your life, and if you can treat it as such. And so, it's one of those friends in the beginning that's feels that it's constantly pointing out your your weaknesses or your mistakes, but no, at the end it's really wants to help you to become a better version of yourself. It's a friend that really believes in your potential. So I think if you can see conscious in that way, as a friend that's really believes in your highest potential and that wants nothing other than for you to reach there as soon as possible, then it can really be a lifelong friend. And listening to it and then practicing with it and trying to obey the little things that it's setting you, the little tasks, Yeah, that way we can also develop our conscience and sharpen the sword of our conscience. What do you say?
And yeah, that's why the conscience is so difficult for people, and such a problematic concept, because very often your conscience will come and prick you just before you do something stupid. There's some
Yeah,
temptation or some desire that you have, and your conscience, there'll be a moment there, like some small moment there where your conscience will prick you and say, "Hey, buddy, like really? You really think
don't
this is
go
a
there.
good idea?" And so very often it's that voice that is trying to save you from yourself. But very often people are just in the habit of ignoring it. So they push it aside. And that's the thing, because most people are identified more with the ego and the narrative version of themselves. That it's very easy for that to overwhelm and push aside the conscience. And so then you end up doing the stupid thing that you told yourself that you shouldn't do, and then afterwards, you feel doubly stupid because you did the thing that made you feel bad. And you did it despite having already warned yourself not to do it. So there's some sense of shame, I think. I think the conscience is the part of our being that is connected with the experience of shame. Because
Right.
we're ashamed of ourselves, that we should have known better and we still did the stupid thing. And shame is such a deeply powerful experience. Like when we're made to feel shame, it's something that we really dislike this experience so much that we'll do anything to try and get out of that experience. And
Yeah,
so I
because
think,
it isolates us, right? We're social animals, and shame is like you're isolated from the group for
yeah,
the
so
wrong.
yeah, that seems right. And so for people, when they feel that, they want to get rid of the thing that's causing them the shame, and instead of getting rid of the wrong action that you're taking, the stupid thing that you know that you shouldn't have done, you instead get rid of the voice that warned you against it.
Yeah,
It's like, no, no, that's the wrong way around. Like, don't get rid of the voice of warning, get rid of the wrong actions. And so that's something that I think is really important, that we give conscience its due, and we don't wrongfully, throw out the conscience to get rid of the sense of shame. Whereas we're ashamed because we're doing things that we know we shouldn't be doing. And that's one way that I like to try and judge my life. I think to myself, am I living in a way that if my mother could see me at every moment of the day, would she be proud of me? If she could see
right.
my intentions and she could see the way I was approaching every situation, like, because I think in that way, like the parental figures can be like a judge. But it's like we all have well, most of us have, a very sweet relationship. We should hopefully still have some of that sweet relationship with our mother. And that's a way for me that I try and capture the sense of how I'm trying to live my life, though. That if my mother was there watching everything, that I would still be, happy and proud, of my life. And
Yeah,
so,
that's a very good. I know that Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers, early American presidents, he was really known to be a very morally upstanding man. Very, very noble and refined. And he used to say, with every action that you do, feel that the whole world is watching.
mm,
And so that's the same idea that whatever you do, never feel that, oh, nobody sees what I'm doing. I can just do these little dealings in the dark. But to
yeah,
feel that whatever you do, the whole world is watching, that is actually a protection that guides you to always try to do the right thing. And, that prevents you from doing the wrong thing, from doing these little dealings in the dark. And because you wouldn't do that if the whole world was watching. Like you wouldn't, not buy a train ticket if the whole world
yeah.
was watching you. You would not like betray somebody behind or speak ill about somebody behind their back if the whole world was watching. So that's a good trick to kind of like play that game and become more friendly with your conscience.
So we can all imagine that we're all living out the Truman Show. And for those of you who haven't seen the
Exactly.
Truman Show, it's a great film about Jim Carrey where he's born onto a TV show and everyone else is just an actor. And the show is being beamed live, every season, like, all around the world. And so everyone's been watching his entire life, and you see his mistakes and his questionable decisions. And so if he had known that the whole world was watching, I think he would have, it would have changed the dynamic, somewhat. Uh,
Yeah.
so another couple of things that I wanted to bring up. one of our great patron saints of our show, the great Albert Einstein, had something to say um,
Nice.
about conscience. He said, "Real human progress depends not so much on inventive ingenuity as on conscience." So
Wow.
real
For him
human
to say that,
progress
that is
depends
amazing.
not so much on inventive ingenuity as on conscience. So he was
Yeah, that
putting
that
as higher than like, this creative urge even.
yeah, that comes from a real scientist, somebody who is very inventive and very innovative. So,
So I think that tells us something really interesting, that because when we're using our ingenuity and we're using our force in the world to try and create a better world, we're trying to force the world into some sort of state of betterment, whether it's through coming up with a new idea or a better way of doing things, or, coming up with an actual invention, or even in our own lives, like trying to sort of, craft our life in a sort of better way, or, do some biohacking and, have more energy or any of these things. That's a valuable thing, and it makes the world better in some way. But if we actually listen to our own conscience, it changes the world in a way that's in tune and in alignment with the universe itself. Because when one way we're doing it from our own will, we're trying to force our will upon the world, and we're trying to change the world with our own will. And the other way, listening to our conscience, we're actually aligning ourselves with the universal will. And then we're going to come up with way more interesting outcomes. We're going to come up with far more harmonious and more integral results than we would if we try and force our will upon the world. So I think that's something that's really useful to know.
yeah, and I think there's a deeper lesson there as well, because ultimately there's a specific task that we have to do that only we can do. Well, we talked about this early, also in an earlier episode. And if you really examine that closely and go to the bottom of that, it is like it also means that there's a lot of tasks that I'm not supposed to do. Although they may seem very noble and good and right, but it may just not be for me, So, some people really feel like, oh, I should be more, I want some fame, or I want some wealth or some name. And you see other people, maybe you have friends who have achieved something that, you'd like to achieve. But then ask yourself the question, is it in my destiny to achieve that? Is it in my soul's will to achieve that? And so always go back to your life's mission, to what is your task here on earth. And if you can be happy in fulfilling your task here on earth, it just solves so many problems. It solves your jealousy problem and your insecurity problem and your worry and anxiety problems, I feel, because you're happy in the task that has been set out for you, and you also know that you have all the tools. You're well equipped to do that task, and it will give you the greatest satisfaction if you actually achieve the task. So there's just only advantages of listening to your soul, your inner voice, your conscience, and doing the things that were laid out to do for you by the universe, by that infinite divine intelligence.
Yeah, so it seems like the conscience in some way is that guiding light and that compass that will help us actually get onto the path of what we are supposed to do, our soul's mission and our own highest calling. And that's an amazing thing to realize, that because a lot of people feel as though, okay, perhaps there is a soul's mission or a soul's calling, but how on earth do I pass out what I should be doing compared to what other people are doing? And like we've said before, that now for a young person, there's an infinite variety of things that you could do. And there's an
Yeah.
infinite variety of things that seem equally valuable. I could be trying to stop the deforestation in the rainforest. I should be doing something, about the melting ice sheet in Greenland. I should be doing something about, ocean plastics. I should be doing. So there's like, as a young person, when you're called to do something and to make something of your life, it's just choice paralysis in every single direction. And
Yeah.
so having the understanding that you do have this voice, and this voice will help guide you onto the right path if you choose to value it and give it its proper due and give it its proper attention. And like you said before, one of the most powerful ways to develop this type of listening is actually by doing it. It's like when we get a feeling or a sense that we've done something wrong, like try and rectify it, try and not make that mistake again, try and make the right choice in the future. So value the information you're getting, and the more value and credence you give to it, the more it will speak clearly and strongly and openly, so you will understand it more easily. So I think that's really cool. This is another actually important point that we can tie into that, and this is a quote from Rousseau, one of the great philosophers.
Oh, yes.
He said, "Conscience is the voice of the soul, as passions are the voice of the body." And so I think this is a good point, or a good time to bring up this idea that just as we have the true conscience that's going to try and guide us onto the right path and is trying to lead us towards our soul and towards our soul's destiny or our soul's mission, we also have this other voice that is near to it, but it's not the same. And this could be like the passions of the body. Sometimes we'll try and, the passions of the body, or we could say the passions of the vital. They will try and sometimes assert their will on us, and they will speak in a way that some in some ways could mimic, or some ways could look similar if we've not been paying attention. But very often, I've heard of people doing things that, are perhaps foolish or reckless. And they'll say, "Oh, I really felt like it was the right thing to do." And so this is where you have to be very wise, and especially when you're playing games which have consequences. Like if you've decided to get into, ski jumping, or jumping, on your mountain bike, doing some really dangerous courses, you want to really listen and be able to pass out the difference between the conscience and the passions of the body and the vital, because sometimes the vital and the body wants to have some great moment of thrill and adventure and excitement, and wants to throw itself off something. But very often the consequences when you get that wrong are so severe that we want to really be very wise with, especially in physical situations. Like, I had a great friend who was part of our spiritual community for many years, and he had a terrible accident while skiing. And so, and a lot of people thought he was a really reckless guy, because sometimes, the passions of his body and vital perhaps overwhelmed the voice of his conscience and soul. And, sometimes he would do foolish things. But this day, he'd spent all day at the ski field, and he was a ski instructor. He was a very, very competent skier. He was an Austrian. And he had decided he wanted to learn backflips. So he'd spent all day doing backflips into the foam pit. So they had a big pit full of, foam blocks, so you could safely go in and practice doing backflips without hurting yourself. And so he'd been practicing. And I remember having heard how he had a terrible accident, and everyone thought he had a terrible accident because he's just a reckless kind of a guy, and that's probably what he would have done. He just would have recklessly got flown into a big jump and tried to do a flip and come off second best. But actually, he had been really trying to listen to his conscience and the voice of his soul. He was really doing it diligently, practicing. And so he felt confident and ready. And so he went and lined up at the ski jump, and he was gonna hit the jump. And just before he was about to drop in for the jump, another skier came up to him, next to him, and told him, "Hey, I just need to let you know, you need to carry way more speed than you think you do when you hit the jump."
Ah,
And so he'd already been practicing, like he kind of knew how much speed he thought he needed from his practice runs. And then suddenly at the last moment, this character or the universe came out of nowhere and gave him this wrong information. You need to go fast, lots of speed.
wow.
So he dropped in and he went way too fast, and he ended up in the backflip over rotating, and he ended up landing flat on his back. And so, he actually broke his pelvis and, smashed his body really terribly. And so that was a moment where he needed to be more discerning, or we all need to be more discerning. But in this moment, it was like listening to the conscience, or listening to the voice that mimics the conscience, that is really the voice of the vital and the body that wants
Yeah.
to throw yourself into things. And so So I
the
always
point.
really felt for him because, it gave him the reputation. It kind of his reputation preceded him. So people thought that he had had this accident through recklessness and foolishness, whereas in fact he had really actually been doing the right thing.
Yeah,
And so we
yeah,
we all need to be more wise, I think, in these
yeah,
situations.
yeah. I wanted to talk also about morality in relation to conscience, because
Ooh.
very often in the, let's say in the kindergarten phase of conscience, it is very directly tied to morality, right? Doing the right thing, buying a ticket for the train, treating the people next to you with, being nice to them, and all these kind of moral things. But I think as your conscience evolves and as that sword becomes sharper, at some point it is not really on par anymore all the time with morality. And so these are the unreasonable things that you talked about, which I like, because sometimes conscience can ask you to do things that are perhaps not fully moral. And there's an example of this in the Bhagavad Gita, in the battle of Kurukshetra, which was the very famous battle in Krishna's time when Sri Krishna was on Earth. He was part of a royal family in India, and there was this big battle, the Battle of Kurukshetra, where the good guys, the Pandavas, were fighting the bad guys, the Kauravas. And this was apparently it was all this was the divine plan to have this battle. There was a higher purpose behind it, and um, during this battle, Krishna was on the side of the Pandavas, and he was the charioteer of Arjuna. Arjuna was his cousin and was kind of his pupil in some ways, his friend. And Krishna promised to the other armies that he would not fight. Um, that was his promise, because Krishna was, well, he was a spiritual master. But he had really, tremendous capacities, and so people were on the other side were really afraid that if Krishna would go into battle, he would use all his occult powers, and it would not be fair. And in those days, a promise, a man's word was really, they would really stick to it. It was deemed absolutely criminal to break a promise, and so. But during the war, there were 6 times when Krishna broke his promise. And so for him as a spiritual master, embodying the highest truth, for him to kind of, lie 6 times or to break his promise 6 times is quite something. But then you realize, well, Krishna was operating from the highest spiritual point of view, from the highest level of consciousness and awareness. And then sometimes you veer away from morality, like you do something that is needed to push the evolution of mankind forward. And sometimes that needs to be done through breaking a promise. And so one example is when they had to defeat a very strong warrior, Bhishma. And it was Arjuna who had to defeat him, but it also was his mentor. He had been growing up with Bhishma, and he considered him as his grandfather and very dear. And so he didn't want to fight him. And so then Krishna had to come out of his chariot and actually start fighting him to show Arjuna, no, no, this has to be done. You have to do this. And so anyway, there's a lot of examples of that when a spiritual master may tell a white lie in order to accelerate the progress of his disciples. There's another example from a master called Ramdas Katya Baba. He was a spiritual master from India he lived in the 1800s, and he was an Advaita Vedantin and a realized soul, an enlightened soul, and he used to tell his disciples, there's a thief in our ashram, and you have to stay up and meditate and be alert so that there will not be a robbery. And this was a complete lie. There was no thief. There was no threat of robbery. But he told his disciples this white lie for them to be up and meditating. And he knew that if he would not tell this white lie, if he would just tell them, meditate through the night, meditate for many hours, they would not be able to. The motivation wasn't strong enough, and they would fall asleep and they would not meditate. So he told this white lie, and every time his disciples believed him and, meditated, and then in the morning he would confess, oh, there was no threat, there was no thief. I just, made that up for you to meditate. But every time they took him seriously, and they were so grateful at the end for him telling that lie, because, they made much more progress that way.
Yeah, it created the right type of intensity. I think perhaps this could be a great idea for you to use in the Amsterdam Meditation Center. At the beginning of the meditation, you should tell everyone else in the center that a thief is somewhere hiding in the meditation center, and that if everyone is not in the highest meditation, that he will come in and steal things. So Giving the right
That's
sort
a
of
great trick.
intensity to the experience.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a really good point, and that's something that I was going to come around to, and so I'm really pleased that you've got to this.
Lovely, lovely.
So that idea of morality versus the voice of the conscience, and so this is a really interesting. So I thought I'd bring this up. So there was a Swiss lady, Marie Louise von Franz, and she made her whole life purpose about studying fairy tales. So she read every fairy tale she had access to. She studied all of the great fairy tales from Europe and all of the indigenous traditions all around the world. She got hold of all of the fairy tales. And what she was hoping was from finding all of the fairy tales that they would hold some sort of archetypal information about how we should live in the world. So she thought, if I take this, because fairy tales are so old and ancient and have been used for so long, there's some transcendent reality or truth in them. They're more real than things that actually happen, because things that actually happened, people forget about them relatively quickly. But a fairy tale has enough reality in it that it can survive for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So we can take fairy tales as being some sort of like transcendently true story, because they can survive for countless years and be passed on orally. So she was so disappointed from the giant canon of mythological and fairy tales, because she was hoping to find these universal laws, like Moses with the Ten Commandments. She was hoping to find 10 concise laws. Always do this. When this happens, do that. So she was trying to find some sort of scriptural truth, but instead she came up with the law of contradiction. So this was the law that she created from reading all of the fairy tales. And the law of contradiction states that whatever one fairy tale tells you to do, another fairy tale will contradict it. So one fairy tale will say, when you find yourself facing danger, you must always stand up and fight against danger. Against evil, let's say evil. So if you find yourself facing up to evil, you must always stand and fight against it. Then there'll be another fairy tale will say, if you find yourself facing evil, you must always run away. Like, it's never wise to face up to evil. Some fairy tale will say, when you're facing up to evil, you should always tell the truth. And another will say, no, it's always fine. If there's serious consequences, it's totally fine to lie. So no matter what rule or law she was trying to come up with, she could always find one fairy tale which would support it, but she would find another one that would go totally against it. And so this was really disappointing, I think, for her in some way. Being a true Swiss person, she was hoping to find that there was some sort of order in the universe, in the universe of stories. And so she was sadly disappointed. But by being there and staying with that, she realized that there's actually an unbelievable treasure within the law of contradiction. So the law of contradiction states that always, no matter what one fairy tale tells you to do, another fairy tale will tell you to do something different. So that means that every situation is unique, and every situation requires you as an individual to actually act out the right behavior for you and for the unique situation you're in. And so it actually gives you true agency to express yourself, and you have true individuality then. If there's only a one size fits all, that whenever you find yourself in this situation, you do this, it becomes like an algorithm. It's like, when this happens, do this. And for us as free sovereign individuals, that's not a very inspiring story, that you have just a list of things: do this, don't do that.
Yeah.
And so she did, though, find at the end, she did find that there was one law, that, well, one idea in all story tales and all fairy tales and mythological stories, that held true across all cultures and all times. So there was one thing. And
Never
so
trust the wolf. Never trust the wolf.
So this is it. The very good. You're quite close, actually.
Oh,
It's, one must never hurt the helpful animals in fairy tales. So one must never hurt the helpful animals in fairy tales. So
helpful?
helpful.
Oh,
So
yeah.
in a lot of fairy tales, a time will come where some cute creature will come in and try and guide the protagonist of the story in a particular direction. And if you ever go against or try and harm that animal in any way, that is always the wrong thing. That is
Okay.
always universally across all times and places and cultures. Never help the helpful animal, never hurt the helpful animals that come to you. And so, like, I was thinking about one, sort of mythological story that we know is Pinocchio. And Pinocchio has this little friend, Jiminy Cricket. And Jiminy Cricket, he's always very suspicious that he's got the initials JC. So I was always slightly suspicious that he was representing something higher and more transcendent. But he's always trying to stop Pinocchio doing stupid things. He's trying to advise him against these things, and
In a
Pinocchio's
way,
all
he's acting as his conscience.
exactly. So he's always trying to guide him away from the wolves and the troublemakers out there. And so this is what this idea is saying in all mythological traditions, is that this little voice, this cute little friendly animal, because it's like, in some ways it's like the voice of nature, because it comes to you and it speaks softly, and it doesn't come to you in this aggressive, strong form that we normally express, ideas to ourselves. And so that the voice of the conscience is this helpful animal. It's this helpful force of nature that is trying to guide us in the right direction. And any time you go against it and try and harm it, it always turns out badly. So I
I love
thought that
it.
was so amazing that that was the one universal in all mythological tales.
Well, I
Was
think in that sense, tying it back to conscience, maybe that is the voice of conscience, the little
yes,
animal that's trying to help you. So never disobey your conscience. That sounds like a pretty good universal rule to me.
yeah, exactly. So I totally agree with that. And
And
then getting
I have this beautiful quote by Walt Whitman about the law of contradictions. If she could have read some Walt Whitman, she could have stumbled across this line: "Do I
yeah,
contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes."
great.
That Walt, he was onto something.
That is beautiful. Thank you for that one. So what I was going to say now was getting on to your point that you were making around. Just bear with me quickly.
Morality.
Yes, morality. So this is a thing that's been known for throughout time, that we've got two competing forces within us. So we've got the force that's wanting acceptance from the group and from the tribe and the society. And so society hands us down this great wealth, but it also becomes like a book of rules, and it becomes like a prison in some way, that it tells us this is it's like the idea of finding a set of rules in all of the fairy tales that will tell us what to do in certain circumstances. That's in some ways what culture and society has done. It's given us a set of guidelines to tell us how to act in different circumstances and different situations. And there's always a great fear that if we go outside of those guidelines, that we're going to become ostracized, we're going to be shamed, we're going to be cast out from the tribe. And for tribal beings, that's a really dangerous situation to put yourself in. If you're living in a dangerous, complex, transformative universe, you want to have at least a few allies with you. So no one wants to be cast out from the tribe. And so sometimes it seems though this voice of conscience, or the voice of this helpful animal that will come, this cute, helpful animal um, that will tell us to do things or point us in directions that seem unreasonable and seem like we don't have a logical justification of why we would do that or why that's the right thing to do. But there is something really transcendent in the relationship between us and our own conscience. And so I've got a little phrase here by a South African writer, Lawrence van der Post. Um,
Oh yeah, very well known. He's a
yeah,
Dutch South African.
yeah. So he wrote a Far Off Place, and he talks about, you see, every human being has his own inborn sense of contract with life. He has, it is true, also an important sense of contract with the community into which he is born. But above that is his own special contract with life itself. This contract is entirely between him and life and nothing. Not even the community can be allowed to suppress it. If it should drive him into conflict with it, this contract is in the keeping of its own voice, a voice we call conscience, and no man can refuse to disobey this voice and ever know any peace again. Believe me, this unease, this disquiet, this enmity of neighbors that has come into our lives because they found us guilty of having broken our contract with society is a peace that passes all understanding in comparison with what would have happened to us if we broke the special sense of contract that you have with life itself.
So it talks about two different relations, the relation with the group, with
Yeah.
society, and the relation with your own soul, your conscience.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing that he points out that the suffering and pain that you have from being offside from your community is absolutely nothing. It's like, it's peace beyond compare compared to the suffering you would endure by being out of alignment with your own conscience. And
Ah,
I think for people that is something that you should actually know and try and take seriously in some way, because very often we take our social relations and our familial relations and our societal obligations, we tend to think that they are more important than anything else because they allow the ease of living in the outer world and they kind of smooth away some of the rough edges. And so we tend to act as though they are more valuable. So we'll make sacrifices to make other people happy, even though we inwardly know that it's not the right thing for us. But if we have the understanding that even if we find ourselves totally offside with everyone we know, but we're completely at peace with our own conscience, that is a trade that you should make 100 times out of 100, because that relationship with your own conscience is the fundamental relationship between you and the universe. And if you can get that right, if you can get the voice of conscience and you being in harmony with it, that seems like, what else do you need in the world?
yeah, very true. Um, Great. So, do you have anything else, or do you think we can kind of round it up for today?
I think that's a good place to end, because I think that takes us on the journey through really, we've tried to map out like a lot of the terrain of conscience, and perhaps how it operates, perhaps how we can start to develop our own conscience, how we can properly, and how we should properly value it in relation to the other forces in our lives. And yeah, we've talked about cute, helpful animals that come to us in fairy tales, and I think we've done a good job on the topic.
So lovely. I totally agree. Well, that brings us to the end then, dear listeners. Thank you for joining us this far. Thank you for watching and listening. And consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. Please leave a comment if you want us to talk about something that, maybe a problem that you encounter in your spiritual journey or a topic that you'd like us to talk about. Let us know in the comments. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.